Every evening for 4 decades, he left food at the tree line. The creature came without fail, until the night it finally communicated why it's terrified of human contact. The answer broke his heart. I stood on the mountain road, watching the high valley disappear into the clouds, knowing I had just brokered a terrifying, silent treaty. I was leaving the most important discovery in human history to the wild. I thought I was safe, having helped them drive out the hunters, having finally made my escape. Then, the phone I hadn't used in a week buzzed in my pocket. The message was brief, untraceable, and specifically mentioned the 2 inoperative batteries I'd planted in the hunter's sonic recorder. Thank you for the batteries. Stay quiet. I spent a week in that remote canyon, trying to outsmart a legend, but the terrifying, chilling truth was that the creature I had been hunting was already using technology and superior military strategy. It didn't fear me because I was a threat. It feared me because I was human. And this is the story of how I learned the true reason why they are hiding. It wasn't the eventual threat of government trackers or that final text message that began this. It started much quieter. It wasn't the size that stopped me, but the impossible precision of the tracks. 4 perfect, massive impressions sinking into the dark mud where nothing human should have been. I'd walked these remote Rockies trails for 20 years, but that morning, the map of my world completely changed. I was 3 days into the high-altitude valley, a vast bowl of silence hemmed in by sheer granite peaks and ancient timberline forest, when I finally found them. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of pine and glacial meltwater, but the quiet was the dominant sense. It was this unnerving, profound silence that made the tracks I encountered seem so jarringly loud. Each print was precisely 17 inches long, unnervingly broad, showing a distinct mid-tarsal break I had only ever seen detailed in theoretical sketches and whispered cryptid reports. I immediately dropped to one knee, instinctively slowing my heart rate into the measured pace of an objective observer, not a panicked victim. This was not a bear. The evidence refuted it. The weight distribution was too balanced, the shape too distinctly hominid, the gait far too purposeful. It wasn't a hoax either. The prints were immensely deep, pulling up soil and root fibers that showed decomposition and settling beginning to set in. They were fresh, perhaps hours old. The chilling part was the direction they took. The creature had walked a clear, steady line straight toward the upper basin, a forgotten, desolate bowl of rock and ice that local prospectors had always called the Valley of Whispers. It was a place of local legend, sealed off from the rest of the world by the colossal, sheer escarpment known as the Great Obsidian Wall. I felt a cold dread settle in my chest, recognizing the sheer physical power and unwavering audacity required to deliberately approach that location. The prints marched onward, without a single waver or deviation from their course. I followed the clear line of prints until they abruptly vanished at the very base of the Great Obsidian Wall. It was a vertical ascent, impossible for any climber without serious gear, marking a spot only one kind of person, or a creature with impossible ambition and strength, would ever dare to climb. A single track is a curiosity. A series of 3-day-old tracks leading toward an impossible vertical wall is instantly a mission. But finding them clustered beside the old surveyor's cairn, positioned so they were looking inward as if they were watching and waiting for me, was a sudden, electric shock of terror that settled deep and coldly in my core. I immediately established a subtle camp a quarter-mile back down the valley floor, choosing a highly concealed site with a commanding view but minimal visibility from the heights above. For the next 24 hours, the overwhelming feeling was one of oppressive, suffocating observation. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow that shifted, felt intentional. The wind would stir the needles behind me with unnerving frequency, and the sudden, profound quiet of the local fauna felt less like natural silence and more like an imposed, deliberate constraint. I found the cairn, a neat 6-foot high pile of stones, stacked with unmistakable purpose. Early on the second day, it marked a boundary, a line I had crossed. It was too recent and too deliberate to be happenstance. Then came the discovery that completely and irrevocably shifted the balance of power: my remote trail camera. I had strategically mounted it high in an ancient pine, positioned to capture anything moving into the upper basin. The camera housing was still there, but the lens was systematically shattered, not accidentally struck by a branch or weather. The glass was pushed inward in a specific, focused way, consistent with a powerful, concentrated thumb press. This was not the random vandalism of a passing beast. It was the calculated action of a strategist who understood technology and the concept of surveillance. The entity not only knew I was present, but was now fully aware of my methods and my intent. As I gently packed up the damaged camera, carefully sealing the useless lens shards, a sound drifted down from the upper basin, a rhythmic, heavy percussion against rock. It wasn't the sound of natural erosion or falling debris. It felt less like a geological incident and more like a loud, resonant declaration of ownership over the entire valley. I left a peace offering, a stack of freshly caught salmon and a piece of carved cedar on a flat stone at the boundary line of the cairn. It was the only move I had left. When I returned the next morning, the fish was gone, but the cedar was replaced by something else entirely. There was a single, woven loop of thick, unknown vine laid neatly where the salmon had been. The food was taken cleanly, without mess. I analyzed the vine. The knotwork was complex, intentional, and showed a clear understanding of tension and structure. It carried a faint, musky scent, like wet hair and ozone. This wasn't an animal taking a free meal. This was an exchange. Communication, I realized, was not only possible, it had begun. I carefully placed a second, more complicated offering, a small, reflective mirror and a plain notebook. I needed to gauge the response to human tools and abstract imagery. The following dawn, the mirror was untouched, the creature demonstrating an uncanny caution toward the reflective glass. But the notebook had been moved. Inside, traced lightly in the surface dust, was a single symbol I immediately recognized from the ancient petroglyphs near the river. I stood in the deep shadow of the canyon wall, staring at the dust-traced symbol. 3 intersecting circles. I'd seen it before, carved into granite by Native Americans thousands of years ago, a mark supposedly meaning the hidden kin. It felt less like a drawing and more like a whispered acknowledgement across history. The creature knew this obscure mark and used it to communicate, suggested a terrifying depth of cultural knowledge or immense longevity. This wasn't merely instinct. I returned to the cairn with soft white chalk, needing to keep the conversation simple. My reply was deliberately primal, a stick figure of myself standing under a large circle representing the sun. It was a basic human statement of existence and location. I placed the chalk drawing on the stone and retreated to wait. The tension was suffocating. I was conducting a philosophical discussion with the unknown. I waited 24 hours. When I returned, the chalk drawing was completely erased. In its place, the entity had drawn something that made my heart seize. A crude map of the valley floor, showing not my main trail, but an unmarked, hidden access point known only to me. The hidden trail was my greatest secret, a narrow deer path only I knew, protected by a precarious rockslide. Yet, there it was on the dust map, drawn with impossible, chilling accuracy. The creature hadn't just watched me, it knew my emergency escape route. The vulnerability I felt was absolute. This wasn't merely a gesture of intelligence, it was a demonstration of dominance. By exposing my secret path, the entity was signaling that I was the trespasser, and it held the map. I made the decision to use that unmarked trail to approach the upper basin, the only way to enter its territory on its terms. The path was difficult, a relentless scramble through thick undergrowth. Every snap of a twig sounded like a firearm discharge in my oppressive closeness. I was no longer the hunter, but the one being permitted to pass. The trek was an act of faith, pushing deeper into the unknown. As I broke through the final screen of trees near the top, I didn't find the creature's lair. Instead, I found a pristine clearing, and in the center, a fire pit, still warm, with remnants of cooked fish and unmistakably a discarded pair of thick leather boots. The sight of those boots, cracked leather, worn tread, clearly human, clearly abandoned, hit me harder than any glimpse of the creature ever could. This wasn't just a wild animal. This was an encounter, a connection, or worse, a hostile exchange with the human world. The small, pristine clearing was a paradox. The fire pit and the boots were signs of a domestic, sustained presence. The internal conflict was immediate. Had the entity traded for the boots, or were they the belongings of someone who had suffered a fatal occurrence? I noted the distinct smell of wood smoke mixed with that lingering metallic scent. I left the fire pit untouched and began searching. I found a small, tarnished hunting knife lying half buried under a patch of moss. Tugging it free, I saw the small engraving, KR 2020. I immediately recognized the initials. They belonged to a local man who had vanished 3 years prior while hiking off trail. I picked up the knife, the knowledge of the missing man heavy in my hand. Then, a low, guttural whistle cut through the air directly above me, a sound that was unmistakably a pitch-perfect mimicry of a hunter's call. The whistle was close, less than 50 feet away, echoing the familiar, old hunter's signal I used to use in these woods, a terrifying, pitch-perfect piece of mockery. It wasn't calling for companionship. It was issuing a specific, immediate warning. I instantly shifted my weight, trying to pinpoint the source. The entity was demonstrating that it understood my methods and that I was currently standing in a precarious position. The air felt thick with tension. I knew a direct confrontation would be catastrophic. My priority was to signal my compliance and retreat. I slowly placed the engraved hunting knife back on the ground, a clear show of leaving the human relic behind. My exit from the clearing was frantic, a delicate ballet between speed and control. As I scrambled back down the unmarked deer path, I could feel the invisible focus of the entity following every careful step. I finally scrambled back to my main camp at midnight. But when I shined my light into the unlit fire pit, 2 fresh fish lay waiting, their scales still wet, and the hunter's knife was gone, replaced by a single, blood-tipped arrowhead. The arrowhead wasn't a warning, it was a demand. Made of razor-sharp, black obsidian, it spoke of violence, of hunting, and most unnervingly, the single drop of blood on its tip was confirmed by the metallic scent to be human. I analyzed the obsidian under my lamp. It was freshly napped, confirming that the entity had access to the material and the knowledge of crafting a specific, ancient weapon. The blood on the tip was minute, but undeniable. The entity had returned the missing hiker's tools, but offered a weapon in return. I realized the 2 fresh fish represented a bounty, and the arrowhead represented a defensive stance. The creature was powerful enough to bring great harm to any human it chose, but it was choosing negotiation. I decided to test the limits of its secrecy. I retrieved a substantial cache of dried elk meat and berries, placing it near the cairn, along with a laminated photograph of the missing hiker. I hoped the picture would solicit a response. It did. The next morning the food was gone, and the picture was torn into small, precise strips, scattered around the perimeter of the cairn like silent, deliberate confetti. The message was clear. No pictures, no faces, no history. The entity wanted anonymity. But that night, as a thick, ground-hugging fog rolled in, I heard a new sound, closer than ever, a noise that bypassed my ears and hit me directly in the chest, a resonant, primal bellow. The vocalization was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was a deeply resonant, almost infrasound vocalization that caused the very air to vibrate. It settled in my diaphragm, forcing a sudden, sickening wave of physical disorientation. This scream was pure, unchecked emotion, either intense fear or absolute, consuming rage. I knew immediately I had violated some core boundary. Under the weight of the sound, my only rational thought was to break camp and go. I scrambled to gather my essentials, finding a long, dark hair, coarse as wire, snagged on my tent zipper. I packed my bags in the darkness, shaking violently. But as I turned to leave, a thought struck me with sickening clarity. The creature hadn't been screaming at me. It had been screaming past me, down the main valley entrance, toward the world I had just left. I stood still, flashlight off, the dark, coarse hair from the tent zipper clutched tightly in my hand. If that massive, despairing scream wasn't directed at me, it was aimed at the main valley entrance. If it was a warning, that meant something else, something human and organized, was moving up the trail. My fear shifted instantly from the unknown intelligence in the woods to the predictable cruelty of humans motivated by greed. Abandoning my plan to leave, I moved quickly and silently toward the valley's primary entrance. I soon located a freshly dug blind, carefully concealed behind a juniper. It was built with professional speed. Inside, the discovery confirmed my worst fears. This was not a curious hiker. I found a specialized, high-sensitivity sonic recorder and an industrial-grade night vision battery pack. The creature's fear was not irrational paranoia. It was a tactical response to a clear and present danger. I decided to tamper with the blind's defenses, opening the sonic recorder and replacing its active batteries with 2 that were completely inoperative, neutralizing the auditory surveillance. As I slipped the inoperative batteries into the recorder, I caught a glint of metal deeper in the brush. Another, smaller device, running on a separate power source I didn't recognize, flashing a faint, rhythmic green light. It wasn't a motion sensor. The device was a sleek, dark cylinder, military-grade in appearance, pulsing a silent, repeating green light. It felt technologically advanced and alien in the dense wilderness. This sophisticated hardware suggested the second party was a highly funded, organized operation, likely governmental, utilizing thermal mapping. This green pulse device was the real threat, providing real-time location. The stakes had been raised to capture. I attempted to dismantle the device, but it was reinforced, locked, and booby-trapped. I was forced to leave it, but I spent tense minutes camouflaging it, caking it with mud to minimize its effectiveness. The creature's desperate scream now made perfect sense. It was being hunted by an enemy that saw the woods as a grid. I had to warn them. Retreating, I realized my only remaining line of communication was the exchange at the cairn. I had to warn you, but how do you draw a picture of a satellite tracker? I grabbed a piece of bark and frantically scratched the only image I could think of. The pulsating green cylinder, surrounded by the 3 intersecting circles of the hidden kin. I left the bark drawing at the cairn, the crude symbol of the green pulse screaming danger. The response I received was immediate and overwhelming. A low, resonant howl ripped through the air, signaling an organized, synchronized countermove. The single howl was quickly answered by 2 others, echoing from different high points. This wasn't a solitary creature, this was a small, coordinated group. I realized I was witnessing a war council. I was suddenly an accomplice. I crawled to a high-altitude observation point, overlooking the hunter's blind. The tension was palpable, sharp, and electric. I settled in to wait, knowing the human hunters would return soon, and that the hidden kin would be waiting for them. From my vantage point, I saw the 2 hunters return to the blind. But as they approached, I saw something else entirely. 3 massive, dark shapes, moving with impossible speed, flanking the humans in a coordinated pattern I would only recognize as a military pincer movement. It was a coordinated assault, precise and silent. Not the blind charge of a beast, but the tactical execution of intelligent beings. The 3 massive creatures moved like dark shadows, surrounding the 2 human hunters before they even sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The creatures employed speed and silence as their primary weapons. Their intent was clearly to disable and disarm, not to inflict great bodily injury. One shape swept in low, tearing apart the sonic recorder. Another went directly for the hidden green pulse device, the sound of crushing plastic audible. The human hunters, realizing they were suddenly trapped, reacted with raw panic, abandoning their packs and attempting a frantic escape. The creatures allowed it. Their mission was the destruction of the surveillance grid. The entire demonstration lasted less than 90 seconds, a terrifying testament to their superior physical dominance. As the 3 dark shapes melted back into the shadows, I turned to leave. But, lying on the rock beside me, where only seconds before there had been nothing, was a small, perfectly preserved human-made compass, the needle vibrating wildly. The compass was a final, chilling gift. It wasn't the property of the fleeing hunters. It was old, brass-cased, heavy with age, and engraved with a date in the 1960s, a time that perfectly aligned with the earliest classified reports of the first major creature sightings. I understood the message. The entity was trading a relic of past surveillance in exchange for my help. This compass was proof that the creature's isolation was not accidental, but an active, intelligent defense spanning decades. It confirmed that the creature's deepest fear was the systematic exploitation and capture that modern humans are capable of. The relics, the warning whistles, the coordinated defense, it all pointed to one ethical conclusion. This was a sentient species that desired only one thing, to be left alone. I decided the valley had to be sealed. I retrieved my field notes, the debris from the destroyed devices, and the old brass compass, carefully burying them all under a massive boulder. I left no trace. I hiked out of the valley, satisfied that I had honored the unspoken treaty. But as I reached my truck, my cell phone, which had been without signal for a week, suddenly buzzed with a single, untraceable text message. "Thank you for the batteries. Stay quiet." The message, brief, untraceable, and specifically mentioning the inoperative batteries, confirmed everything I suspected and far more than I could have imagined. They had not only observed my every move, but possessed the technology, the intelligence, and now an instantaneous, secure line of communication that spanned the digital world I deliberately left behind. The line was open, but the terms were non-negotiable. My final chilling realization was complete. The creature was not a primitive relic of the wild, surviving on instinct alone, but a sentient force, actively managing its isolation, fighting a cold war for survival against the encroaching human world. The sheer complexity of the operation, from the coordinated military defense to the intricate understanding of my sabotage, and the calculated use of a burner communication channel, demonstrated a level of strategic capability that dwarfed my own knowledge and assumptions. I had witnessed the true reason Bigfoot fears us. We are relentless in our pursuit of exploitation, fundamentally incapable of respecting the need for silence, and we will inevitably capture or bring harm to what we cannot control. My role was instantly transformed. I was no longer an explorer or an accidental trespasser, but an unwilling keeper of a devastating secret and an active accomplice to their continued freedom. My immediate encounters in the valley were over, but the arrangement, the silent negotiation for peace, had just begun. I understood perfectly. I could not return to observe them, but I was now morally and functionally compelled to honor the unspoken treaty we had forged. I never saw the tracks again. The giant footprints that had first led me into that canyon had vanished, as if swept clean by the wind, eliminating all physical evidence of their existence. But once a month, like clockwork, when I drive out to the valley perimeter and leave my tribute of fish and dried fruit at the hidden cairn, I find the same simple offering in return: a single, perfectly woven loop of thick, dark vine. It is a silent signature, a confirmation of the ongoing pact. And that is enough to know that the secret of the hidden valley is still safe, that they are still there, living in the dense, intelligent shadows, and that sometimes silence is the only way to save a species from the world. The deepest secrets of the mountains are rarely revealed, only briefly glimpsed. If you believe there are mysteries worth protecting, and if you dare to walk these hidden trails with us again, subscribe and hit that like button. Share this journey with others who understand that the real world still contains the impossible. Because out there, beyond the boundary of the known, the hidden kin are still watching, still waiting, and they know exactly where you are.